Elena Vasquez had always been different from other children growing up in the mountains of northern Afghanistan. While her friends played with dolls, she was tracking deer through pine forests with her grandfather, learning to read wind patterns and judge distances with uncanny precision. Her father, a former military marksman, noticed her extraordinary eyesight and steady hands when she was just 12 years old. By 15, she could hit a tin can from 800 meters using an old hunting rifle. When the Taliban resurged in her region in 2021, Elena's village became a strategic checkpoint that both sides desperately wanted to control. The village sat at the intersection of three mountain passes, making it crucial for supply routes. Elena's family had lived there for generations, farming the terraced fields and raising livestock. They never imagined their peaceful existence would be shattered by war. The first attack came at dawn on a Tuesday in September. Elena was milking goats when she heard the distant rumble of vehicles approaching. Her father rushed outside, binoculars in hand, and his face went pale. A convoy of Taliban fighters was moving up the main road, their black flags visible even from 2 kilometers away. The village had no organized defense, just a handful of old hunting rifles and farmers who had never seen real combat. Elena's father made a desperate call to the nearest military outpost, a small coalition base commanded by Captain Marcus Rodriguez. The captain had been expecting this attack for weeks, knowing the Taliban wanted to control the passes before winter set in. However, his squad of 12 soldiers was already stretched thin, patrolling a territory the size of Rhode Island with limited resources and aging equipment. When the call came through on the radio, Rodriguez faced an impossible decision. He could abandon the village to save his men, or risk everything to help civilians he barely knew. His orders were clear about avoiding unnecessary engagement, but something in the farmer's voice made him pause. The man spoke broken English, but his desperation was unmistakable. Behind his voice, Rodriguez could hear children crying and women shouting instructions to each other as they prepared to flee. Rodriguez gathered his squad and explained the situation. They had 2 choices: follow protocol and stay at their fortified position, or attempt a rescue mission through hostile territory with minimal backup. The nearest reinforcements were 4 hours away by helicopter, assuming the weather held. Every soldier in that room knew the risks, but they also knew that abandoning civilians went against everything they had sworn to protect. Sergeant Patricia Thompson, the squad's communications specialist, was the first to speak up. She had 2 daughters back home in Texas, roughly the same age as some of the children in the village. The thought of leaving them defenseless against armed militants made her stomach turn. One by one, the other soldiers voiced their agreement. They would go, regardless of the consequences. The plan was simple but dangerous. They would approach the village from the eastern ridge, using the morning shadows to mask their movement. Once in position, they would provide covering fire while the villagers evacuated through the western pass. The timeline was critical because Taliban reinforcements were reportedly moving in from 3 different directions, and the squad would be completely outnumbered within hours. As Rodriguez's team prepared their gear, Elena was having her own conversation with her father. She begged him to let her help, explaining that she knew every rock and tree on the surrounding ridges. Her shooting skills were no longer a childhood hobby, but potentially the difference between life and death for everyone in the village. Her father initially refused, but when he saw the determination in her eyes, he realized she would find a way to help regardless of his permission. Elena gathered her grandfather's old rifle, a bolt-action weapon that had seen action in previous conflicts. She loaded it carefully, checking the scope alignment and estimating wind conditions. The morning air was still, which would help with accuracy, but she knew conditions could change rapidly in the mountains. She also packed water, ammunition, and a small radio her father had given her years earlier for hunting trips. The Taliban convoy was now less than an hour away from the village. Elena could see dust clouds rising from their vehicles as they navigated the winding mountain road. She counted at least 6 trucks and estimated 30 to 40 fighters, far more than anyone in the village could handle. The coalition squad was still 40 minutes out, moving as quickly as they dared through unfamiliar terrain. Elena's mother grabbed her arm as she prepared to leave, tears streaming down her face. She knew her daughter was walking into extreme danger, But she also understood that staying meant certain capture or death for everyone. The Taliban had shown no mercy to villages that resisted their advance, and rumors of executions and forced relocations had spread throughout the region. Elena hugged her mother tightly, promising to return safely, though both women knew it might be the last time they saw each other. As Elena climbed toward her chosen position on the northern ridge, she could hear the Taliban vehicles growing louder. Their engines echoed off the mountain walls, creating an ominous soundtrack to what would become one of the most extraordinary acts of courage in modern warfare. She had no military training, no backup, and no guarantee that help would arrive in time. All she had was her skill, her determination, and an old rifle that would soon make history. Captain Rodriguez's squad moved through the rocky terrain like ghosts, their desert camouflage blending with the morning shadows. Each soldier carried 40 pounds of equipment, including ammunition, medical supplies, and communication gear. The thin mountain air made every step exhausting, but they pushed forward knowing that innocent lives hung in the balance. Rodriguez checked his GPS repeatedly, calculating their approach route to avoid detection while maintaining visual contact with the village below. Meanwhile, Elena had reached her position on the northern ridge, approximately 1,200 meters from the village center. She set up her rifle behind a cluster of boulders, using her grandfather's old military techniques to create a stable shooting platform. The view was spectacular and terrifying simultaneously. She could see Taliban fighters dismounting from their vehicles, spreading out in tactical formations that suggested military training. These were not amateur insurgents, but experienced soldiers who understood urban warfare. The first Taliban patrol entered the village at exactly 0847 hours. Elena watched through her scope as they kicked down doors and herded frightened civilians into the central square. An elderly man who moved too slowly was struck with a rifle butt, sending him sprawling into the dirt. Women clutched their children closer, while teenage boys were separated from their families for questioning. Elena's hands trembled with anger, but she forced herself to remain calm and wait for the right moment. Rodriguez's squad was still 20 minutes away when Elena's radio crackled to life. Her father's voice came through in urgent whispers, reporting that Taliban fighters were systematically searching every building. They had discovered the village's small cache of hunting weapons and were demanding information about any military presence in the area. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and Elena realized she might have to act before the coalition soldiers arrived. From her elevated position, Elena could see details that would prove crucial to the rescue operation. She counted exact numbers of fighters, noted their weapons and equipment, and identified their command structure based on how they moved and communicated. The Taliban commander was a tall man with a distinctive red scarf who positioned himself near the village's central well. He seemed to be coordinating the operation through a handheld radio, suggesting backup units were nearby. Elena's military radio, which her father had modified years earlier to receive coalition frequencies, suddenly buzzed with incoming communications. She heard Captain Rodriguez's voice reporting his squad's position and requesting intelligence about enemy strength. Without hesitation, Elena keyed her microphone and provided a detailed tactical assessment in clear, precise English that surprised Rodriguez with its military accuracy. The captain immediately recognized the value of having an elevated observer with clear sight lines to the target area. Elena's position gave her a bird's-eye view that his ground-based squad could never achieve. He asked her to maintain radio contact and provide real-time updates on enemy movement while his team completed their approach. Elena agreed, though she didn't mention that she was armed and prepared to engage if necessary. As Rodriguez's squad crested the final ridge before their assault position, Elena reported disturbing new intelligence. Additional Taliban vehicles were approaching from the south, carrying what appeared to be heavy weapons and specialized equipment. The rescue window was closing rapidly, and the odds were becoming impossible. Rodriguez realized his 12-man squad would soon face overwhelming numbers in unfavorable terrain with limited ammunition and no air support. Elena watched the Taliban commander through her scope as he received a radio transmission that made him smile coldly. He gestured towards several village buildings and barked orders to his subordinates. Elena's blood ran cold as she realized what was happening. The Taliban weren't just taking prisoners. They were preparing to make an example of the village that would terrorize the entire region. Families were being forced into buildings that fighters were preparing to set ablaze. The coalition squad reached their planned assault position just as Elena reported the Taliban's intentions. Rodriguez faced an impossible tactical situation. A direct assault would save some civilians, but guarantee casualties among his soldiers and likely result in executions of remaining villagers. Waiting for reinforcements meant watching innocent people die. There were no good options, only degrees of tragedy. Elena made her decision without consulting anyone. She identified the Taliban commander in her scope, estimated the range at approximately 1,400 meters, and began calculating environmental factors. The morning breeze was picking up, creating a slight crosswind that would affect bullet trajectory. The target was moving unpredictably, making timing critical. She had one shot to disrupt the Taliban operation and create confusion that might give Rodriguez's squad the advantage they needed. The first shot rang out across the valley at exactly 0912 hours. Elena's bullet struck the Taliban commander's center mass, dropping him instantly and sending his subordinates scrambling for cover. The precision of the shot, from an impossible range, created immediate chaos among fighters who had assumed they controlled all strategic positions. Some dove behind vehicles while others returned random fire toward the ridgeline, unable to pinpoint the sniper's location. Rodriguez's squad used the confusion to advance rapidly toward the village perimeter. Elena continued providing overwatch, taking carefully aimed shots at Taliban fighters who exposed themselves while trying to reorganize. Her shooting was methodical and devastating, each bullet finding its target despite the extreme range and challenging conditions. The Taliban fighters, accustomed to fighting poorly armed villagers, had never faced such precise long-range fire. Within minutes, the tactical situation had completely reversed. What began as a Taliban operation against defenseless civilians had become a coordinated assault by forces they couldn't see or effectively engage. Elena's position remained hidden among the rocks and shadows, making her effectively invisible to enemies below. Her shots came from different angles as she moved between firing positions, creating the illusion of multiple snipers. Rodriguez's squad reached the village outskirts as Elena eliminated the Taliban's heavy weapons crew with 3 consecutive shots. The fighters carrying rocket-propelled grenades became her priority targets, as these weapons posed the greatest threat to both civilians and coalition soldiers. Each shot required split-second timing and perfect accuracy, as missing meant allowing devastating weapons to be brought into action against friendly forces. The evacuation began immediately as Rodriguez's soldiers secured the village center. Elena maintained overwatch, engaging Taliban fighters who attempted to flank the rescue operation or prevent civilians from reaching safety. Her ammunition was running low, and she knew the approaching reinforcements would soon make her position untenable. The real test of her skills was yet to come, as the most dangerous phase of the operation was about to begin. The evacuation proceeded with military precision as Rodriguez's squad guided villagers toward the western pass. Elena watched through her scope as families carried whatever possessions they could manage, children clinging to their parents while elderly residents struggled with the steep terrain. Every few minutes, she spotted Taliban fighters attempting to circle around and cut off the escape route, forcing her to engage targets at increasingly difficult angles and distances. Elena's ammunition supply was becoming critical. She had started with 40 rounds and was down to fewer than 15. Each shot now carried enormous weight, as missing meant potentially allowing Taliban fighters to reach positions where they could devastate the evacuation column. She forced herself to slow down, taking extra time to ensure perfect sight alignment and breathing control despite the pressure of rapidly changing battlefield conditions. The Taliban reinforcements arrived earlier than expected, approaching from 2 directions simultaneously. Elena counted at least 20 additional fighters in pickup trucks mounted with heavy machine guns. These vehicles could reach the western pass and trap the evacuating civilians before they reached safety in the mountains. Rodriguez's squad was already fully engaged protecting the main evacuation route, and couldn't spare soldiers to deal with this new threat. Elena made a tactical decision that would define the rest of the operation. Instead of continuing to provide general overwatch, she would focus entirely on stopping the reinforcement vehicles. This meant allowing some Taliban fighters in the village to operate unchallenged, but preventing the vehicles from reaching the pass took priority. She shifted positions to gain a better angle on the approaching convoy. The first vehicle was moving at approximately 60 kilometers per hour on the winding mountain road. Elena estimated the range at 2,100 meters and calculated the lead time needed to hit a moving target at that distance. She had never attempted such a shot before, but the mathematics were straightforward even if the execution would be extraordinarily difficult. Wind conditions had shifted, adding complexity to an already challenging scenario. Elena's first shot at the moving vehicle missed, striking the road surface just behind the rear wheels. The miss revealed her position to the convoy, which immediately began evasive maneuvers while returning fire in her direction. Bullets struck the rocks around her hiding spot, sending stone fragments flying and forcing her to relocate quickly. She had revealed herself for nothing, and now the Taliban knew exactly where she was positioned. The second vehicle in the convoy was equipped with a mounted machine gun that began systematic suppressing fire against Elena's ridge. Heavy-caliber bullets crashed into the rocks above her head, making it impossible to maintain a stable shooting position. She was forced to move constantly, carrying her rifle and remaining ammunition while Taliban fighters below tried to pin down her location with concentrated fire. Rodriguez heard the increased gunfire from Elena's position and realized she was in serious trouble. He detailed 2 soldiers to provide covering fire toward the ridge while maintaining the evacuation schedule. The captain understood that Elena's survival was now directly linked to his squad's ability to eliminate Taliban fighters quickly and efficiently. Every minute she remained exposed increased the probability of her being killed or captured. Elena found a new shooting position approximately 200 meters from her original location. The range to the convoy had increased to nearly 2,300 meters, making accurate shooting almost impossible under normal circumstances. However, the vehicles had slowed significantly due to the winding road, giving her a better chance of hitting her targets. She loaded one of her final rounds and attempted to steady her breathing despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. The shot was perfect. Elena's bullet struck the driver of the lead vehicle, causing it to veer off the mountain road and rolled down a steep embankment. The machine gunner was thrown clear during the rollover, eliminating both the vehicle and its heavy weapon from the battlefield. The remaining vehicles in the convoy stopped abruptly, their drivers unwilling to continue along a road where snipers could engage them with devastating accuracy. Elena immediately shifted her focus to the second vehicle, which had stopped approximately 2,500 meters away. The crew was dismounting and attempting to set up their heavy machine gun in a fixed position from which they could support the Taliban fighters in the village. Eliminating this weapon was crucial, as its range and firepower could reach both the evacuation route and Rodriguez's squad positions. The distance was at the extreme limit of her rifle's effective range, but Elena had no choice but to attempt the shot. She estimated wind speed and direction, calculated bullet drop over the extended range, and aimed significantly high to compensate for gravity's effect on the projectile. The target was partially concealed behind the vehicle, giving her only a small window of opportunity when the gunner moved to adjust his weapon. Elena's shot struck the machine gunner in the upper torso, dropping him instantly and preventing the heavy weapon from being brought into action. The remaining Taliban fighters dove for cover behind their vehicles, unwilling to expose themselves to the invisible sniper who had demonstrated impossible accuracy at incredible distances. Their advance toward the evacuation route was effectively stopped. Rodriguez's squad had successfully evacuated most of the villagers, but several families remained trapped in buildings on the far side of the village. Taliban fighters had regrouped and were preventing access to these areas, using civilians as human shields while they consolidated their defensive positions. The captain faced another impossible decision: abandon the remaining villagers or risk his entire squad in a direct assault against entrenched positions. Elena observed the tactical situation and realized she might be able to provide the support Rodriguez needed. Her elevated position gave her angles of fire that could reach Taliban positions without endangering the trapped civilians. However, she was down to fewer than 10 rounds, and the ranges involved would test every skill her grandfather had taught her during those childhood hunting trips. The Taliban fighters had learned to respect the sniper on the ridge and were moving carefully between covered positions. Elena waited patiently, knowing she couldn't afford to waste ammunition on difficult shots. She needed clear targets at reasonable ranges where her remaining bullets could have maximum impact on the tactical situation. Her opportunity came when a group of Taliban fighters attempted to move between buildings using what they thought was a concealed route. Elena had been watching this particular alley for several minutes, knowing it was the most likely path for enemy movement. When 4 fighters sprinted across the opening simultaneously, she was ready. Elena's rapid fire eliminated 3 of the 4 fighters before they could reach cover. Her shooting was so precise and quick that the surviving fighter threw down his weapon and surrendered rather than continue fighting against an opponent he couldn't see or effectively engage. This psychological victory was as important as the tactical one, as other Taliban fighters began questioning whether continued resistance was worth the cost. The balance of power in the village had completely shifted. What began as a Taliban operation against defenseless civilians had become a nightmare scenario where an invisible sniper eliminated targets with supernatural precision. Elena's reputation was spreading among enemy fighters, and many were more concerned with escaping the area than completing their mission. The evacuation could now be completed successfully, but Elena's own escape remained uncertain. Rodriguez's squad had successfully evacuated the majority of villagers when they received devastating intelligence through intercepted Taliban communications. A massive reinforcement convoy was approaching from the eastern valley, including armored vehicles and experienced fighters who specialized in mountain warfare. The estimated time of arrival was less than 30 minutes, after which the tactical situation would become completely untenable for the small coalition force. Elena monitored the radio communications while observing the immediate battlefield through her scope. She could see Taliban fighters regrouping in covered positions, apparently waiting for their reinforcements before launching a coordinated counterattack. Several wounded fighters were being treated behind vehicles, indicating the enemy was planning for a prolonged engagement rather than tactical withdrawal. The remaining trapped villagers included Elena's own aunt and 2 young cousins who had been visiting from a neighboring valley when the attack began. They were barricaded in a stone building approximately 300 meters from Rodriguez's current position, with Taliban fighters occupying strategic positions between the rescue squad and the civilians. Any attempt to reach them would require crossing open ground under direct enemy observation and fire. Elena's ammunition situation had become desperate. She had exactly 7 rounds remaining, with no possibility of resupply until the operation was concluded. Every shot would need to count not just tactically, but strategically in terms of the overall mission success. She began prioritizing targets based on their immediate threat to the evacuation operation and Rodriguez's squad. Captain Rodriguez established radio contact with Elena to coordinate the final phase of the evacuation. He explained the approaching reinforcement threat and asked for her assessment of the tactical situation from her elevated observation point. Elena provided detailed intelligence about enemy positions, estimated strength, and potential approach routes for the incoming convoy. Her information was more accurate than anything Rodriguez could have obtained through conventional reconnaissance. The plan they developed was audacious and dangerous. Rodriguez would create a diversionary assault against Taliban positions on the south side of the village, drawing attention and enemy fire away from the trapped civilians. During this distraction, 2 soldiers would attempt to reach the building and extract Elena's family members. Elena would provide precision overwatch, eliminating any threats that emerged during the rescue attempt. Elena selected her targets carefully, identifying Taliban fighters who were positioned to interfere with the rescue operation. She had to balance immediate tactical needs against conservation of ammunition, knowing that the approaching reinforcements might require every remaining bullet. The pressure was enormous, as failure would likely result in the capture or death of both her family members and Rodriguez's soldiers. The diversionary assault began at exactly 1015 hours. Rodriguez's squad opened fire against Taliban positions with coordinated precision, creating the impression of a much larger force preparing for a major offensive. The enemy responded predictably, concentrating their defensive fire against the perceived threat while inadvertently exposing themselves to Elena's elevated position. Elena's first shot eliminated a Taliban machine gunner who was positioned to intercept any rescue attempt. The range was approximately 800 meters, and the target was partially concealed behind sandbags, requiring precise bullet placement through a narrow opening. The shot was successful, silencing a weapon that could have devastated the rescue team. Two coalition soldiers, Sergeant Thompson and Private Martinez, began their approach toward the trapped civilians using a route Elena had identified through her scope. She maintained constant overwatch, tracking their movement while simultaneously monitoring for Taliban fighters who might detect and engage them. The soldiers moved with professional skill, using shadows and terrain features to mask their advance. A Taliban fighter emerged from a concealed position directly in the path of the advancing soldiers. Elena engaged him at 650 meters range, eliminating the threat before he could raise his weapon or alert his companions. The soldiers continued their approach, unaware they had been seconds away from walking into an ambush that would have compromised the entire operation. Elena's radio crackled with urgent intelligence from Rodriguez's position. The Taliban reinforcement convoy was visible in the eastern valley, moving faster than anticipated due to improved road conditions. The estimated arrival time had been reduced to 15 minutes, meaning the rescue operation was rapidly running out of time. Elena would need to provide more aggressive fire support to accelerate the evacuation timeline. The two soldiers reached the building containing Elena's family members, but discovered that Taliban fighters had barricaded the main entrance and were holding the civilians at gunpoint inside. A direct assault would likely result in the death of hostages, while any delay would allow reinforcements to arrive and trap everyone in the village. The situation required surgical precision that only Elena's long-range shooting could provide. Elena observed the building through her scope, noting that Taliban fighters had positioned themselves near windows where they could monitor the surrounding area while maintaining control over their hostages. She identified two targets who would need to be eliminated simultaneously to prevent either from harming civilians during the assault. This would require precise timing and perfect accuracy with consecutive shots. The first shot struck a Taliban fighter who was positioned at the building's main window. Elena immediately worked the bolt action of her rifle and engaged the second target before he could react to his companion's death. Both shots were successful, eliminating the immediate threat to the hostages and allowing Rodriguez's soldiers to breach the building safely. Elena's family members emerged from the building shaken, but unharmed. Sergeant Thompson and Private Martinez quickly guided them toward the evacuation route, but they would need to cross approximately 400 meters of open ground before reaching the safety of the mountain pass. Taliban fighters in scattered positions throughout the village were already repositioning to intercept the fleeing group. Elena had 3 rounds remaining and could see at least 6 Taliban fighters moving to intercept her family and the rescue team. The ranges varied from 900 to 1,200 meters, and several targets would be moving while she attempted to engage them. She would need to prioritize threats and make every shot count, knowing that missing even once could result in the capture or death of people she loved. The Taliban reinforcement convoy was now visible from Elena's position, approximately 10 minutes away from reaching the village. Rodriguez's squad was beginning their own tactical withdrawal, but they would need to maintain covering fire until the final civilians reached safety. Elena realized that her role was transitioning from supporting the rescue to ensuring the survival of everyone involved, including herself. Elena engaged the closest Taliban fighter at 900 meters range, eliminating him as he attempted to position himself along the evacuation route. Her next shot targeted a fighter who was approximately 1,100 meters away and moving toward a position where he could ambush the rescue group. The bullet found its target, dropping the enemy fighter and clearing another section of the escape route. Elena had 1 round remaining as she observed a final Taliban fighter moving into position to ambush her family and the rescue team. The range was approximately 1,200 meters, and the target was moving erratically while using available cover to mask his approach. This would be Elena's most challenging shot of the entire operation, and failure would likely result in casualties among the people she was trying to save. The shot was perfect, eliminating the final immediate threat to the evacuation group. Elena's family and the rescue team reached the safety of the mountain pass just as the Taliban reinforcement convoy entered the village. However, Elena herself was now trapped on the ridge with no ammunition and enemy forces actively searching for her position. The most dangerous phase of her ordeal was about to begin. Elena's rifle was empty, and Taliban reinforcements were systematically searching the ridge where she had been operating. She could hear their voices echoing off the rock walls as they coordinated their hunt for the sniper who had devastated their forces. Without ammunition, her weapon was useless except as a potential club, and she was outnumbered by at least 20 fighters who knew these mountains almost as well as she did. The Taliban had brought tracking specialists with their reinforcement convoy, fighters who had spent years hunting coalition forces through similar terrain. Elena watched through her scope as they examined her previous shooting positions, following the subtle signs she had left while moving between locations. They were methodical and professional, gradually narrowing down her possible hiding places through process of elimination. Captain Rodriguez's squad had reached relative safety with the evacuated villagers, but they faced an impossible decision regarding Elena. Military protocol demanded they continue their withdrawal to avoid further casualties, but abandoning the young woman who had saved their mission felt like betrayal. Rodriguez established communications with his command headquarters, requesting immediate air support or reinforcement to assist with Elena's extraction. The response from headquarters was devastating. No air support was available due to weather conditions in the mountains, and the nearest reinforcement units were still hours away. Rodriguez was ordered to continue his withdrawal and avoid further engagement with superior enemy forces. Elena was officially classified as a local asset who had operated independently, meaning military resources could not be risked for her rescue. Elena understood her situation perfectly. She had saved her village, her family, and 12 coalition soldiers, but now faced capture or death at the hands of fighters who would show no mercy to someone who had killed so many of their comrades. The Taliban had a reputation for making examples of snipers, particularly those who had operated with such devastating effectiveness against their forces. However, Elena possessed one advantage her hunters didn't realize. During childhood hunting trips with her grandfather, she had discovered a series of caves and hidden passages that connected different sections of the ridge. These natural tunnels had been carved by water over thousands of years and were known only to local families who had used them for generations to move livestock during severe weather. Elena began her escape by moving toward a cave entrance she remembered from years earlier. The opening was concealed behind a rockfall and barely large enough for a person to squeeze through, making it invisible to searchers who didn't know exactly where to look. She could hear Taliban fighters getting closer, their conversations indicating they were confident of capturing her within the next hour. The cave system was treacherous, with narrow passages, sudden drops, and sections that required crawling through spaces barely wider than her shoulders. Elena moved by memory and instinct, remembering her grandfather's lessons about navigating underground without light sources that might reveal her position. The darkness was complete, but she forced herself to move steadily deeper into the mountain's interior. Taliban fighters discovered Elena's final shooting position and realized she was no longer in the immediate area. Their search pattern expanded, but they focused on surface routes that offered concealment and egress toward the valley floor. None of them suspected that their target had disappeared underground into passages that appeared on no military maps or satellite imagery. Elena emerged from the cave system approximately 2 kilometers from her original position, in a valley that connected to the western evacuation route. She was exhausted, dehydrated, and had sustained multiple cuts and bruises from crawling through rough passages, but she was alive and temporarily safe from immediate pursuit. The Taliban were still searching the ridge where she had been hours earlier. Rodriguez's squad had established a temporary defensive position in the Western Pass, officially to monitor Taliban movement, but actually hoping for some sign that Elena had escaped capture. When Rodriguez received a weak radio transmission from Elena's emergency frequency, he initially thought it might be a Taliban deception operation designed to lure his soldiers into an ambush. Elena's voice was unmistakable, however, and she provided tactical information that proved her identity and current status. She was approximately 5 kilometers from Rodriguez's position, moving through terrain that would take her several hours to traverse. The Taliban were still actively searching for her, and she could see their vehicle patrols moving through the valley below her escape route. Captain Rodriguez faced another critical decision that would define his military career. Official orders prohibited him from conducting rescue operations for Elena, but personal honor demanded he help the young woman who had saved his entire squad. He decided to interpret his orders creatively, claiming that Elena possessed tactical intelligence about Taliban operations that made her extraction a legitimate military objective. Rodriguez detailed 4 soldiers to conduct a reconnaissance mission toward Elena's reported position. The mission was officially described as intelligence gathering rather than rescue, providing legal cover for the operation while maintaining plausible deniability for higher command authorities. Sergeant Thompson volunteered to lead the mission, stating that she owed Elena her life and the lives of her fellow soldiers. The rescue team moved through challenging mountain terrain while maintaining radio contact with Elena. Her position was precarious, as she was trapped between Taliban patrol routes with limited options for movement. The team would need to reach her before enemy forces expanded their search pattern to include her current hiding place. Elena provided crucial intelligence about Taliban patrol schedules and routes, allowing Rodriguez's team to avoid detection while approaching her position. Her days of observing enemy movement patterns through her rifle scope had given her detailed knowledge of their tactical procedures and timing. This information was invaluable for planning the extraction operation. The rescue team reached Elena's position just as Taliban patrols were expanding their search into her valley. The timing was perfect, but terrifying, with enemy forces less than 500 meters away when contact was established. Elena was exhausted and dehydrated, but still mentally sharp enough to coordinate her own extraction with military precision. The return journey to the coalition position was a masterpiece of tactical movement. Elena's knowledge of local terrain combined with the soldiers' military training created a perfect team that avoided multiple Taliban patrols while moving through hostile territory. They used natural concealment and carefully timed movement to remain invisible to enemy forces who were actively searching for them. Elena and the rescue team reached coalition lines safely just as reports arrived about massive Taliban reinforcements moving into the region. The window for any rescue operation had closed completely, and Elena's extraction was likely the last successful mission possible before the area became completely dominated by enemy forces. The timing had been perfect, achieved through courage, skill, and extraordinary luck. The aftermath of Elena's mission created legendary status among coalition forces throughout Afghanistan. Her impossible sniper shots had saved 12 coalition soldiers and dozens of civilians while operating alone against overwhelming odds. Military historians would later classify her 2,900-meter shot against the Taliban convoy as one of the longest confirmed combat eliminations by a civilian in modern warfare. Elena was quietly relocated to a safe location outside Afghanistan, where her identity was protected and her contributions to the mission were classified to prevent Taliban retaliation against her surviving family members. Captain Rodriguez recommended her for military honors, though these awards would remain secret for years due to security considerations. The village Elena saved was eventually abandoned as Taliban control expanded throughout the region, but the people she rescued survived to rebuild their lives in safer locations. Rodriguez's squad returned safely to their base, carrying with them the knowledge that they had witnessed something extraordinary during those desperate hours in the mountains. Elena's story spread through military channels as an example of exceptional courage under impossible circumstances. Her actions demonstrated that extraordinary heroism could emerge from unexpected sources when people faced situations that demanded the absolute best of human character and capability. The young woman who had learned to hunt with her grandfather had become a legend whose story would inspire soldiers and civilians for generations to come.